it was refreshing. And then everybody started talking about it, and we went back and looked at a couple more films, and then
Clint Eastwood has spent nearly a century in Hollywood. He has played tough guys, directed masterpieces, and built a reputation as one of the coolest, most disciplined men in the film business. Most people see him as calm, unshakable, and impossible to rattle. But behind that legendary composure, there is a man who remembers every slight, every disappointment, and every moment someone wasted his time. And over the decades, 6 people pushed him far enough that he cut them out of his life completely and never looked back. Before we get into it, if you enjoyed deep dives into Hollywood's untold stories, the feuds, the fallouts, and the secrets that never made it into the press, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a video. We cover the real stories behind the biggest names in entertainment, and trust us, there is a lot more where this came from. Now, let's get into it. The first name on this list might surprise you, because on paper, the pairing should have been perfect. When Clint Eastwood directed Leonardo DiCaprio in J. Edgar back in 2010, the whole of Hollywood was excited. You had one of the most respected directors alive working alongside one of the most talented actors of his generation. It sounded like a dream. What actually happened on set was something else entirely. From the very first day of filming, DiCaprio arrived with folders full of research. He had read through historical documents, studied FBI memos, and prepared like he was writing a dissertation rather than showing up to shoot a movie. For most directors, that kind of dedication would be welcome. For Clint Eastwood, it was already a warning sign. Clint works fast. He trusts instinct. He believes that if the emotion is real, you capture it quickly and move on. DiCaprio's way of working was the complete opposite, and the tension started building almost immediately. Things came to a head during one of the film's most emotional scenes. DiCaprio delivered the scene in a single take. It was raw, honest, and completely believable. Everyone in the room felt it. Clint called cut and said it was perfect, but DiCaprio wanted to go again, and again, and again. By the time they had done the scene 6 times, Clint had stepped away from the camera. He was standing at the craft table with a coffee in his hand, saying nothing, looking at nothing in particular. When someone checked on him, he said quietly that DiCaprio was still searching for something he himself had already found. That one sentence said everything. To Clint, the performance had been right the first time. Doing it over and over again wasn't improving it, it was just noise. When the film finished, there was no falling out, no argument, no dramatic goodbye. There was just silence, the kind of silence Clint is famous for. In the years that followed, whenever DiCaprio's name came up in casting discussions for Eastwood projects, Clint would simply shake his head and say he was a great actor, but not his kind. They have never worked together since. DiCaprio went on to win his Oscar, but he never received another call from Eastwood. In Clint's world, you get one shot to get it right. If you can't trust what you've already done, he has no use for you. The second person on this list never actually worked with Clint, which makes the feud all the more interesting. Michael Moore is a documentary filmmaker and political commentator, and he managed to get under Clint Eastwood's skin so deeply that Clint once joked, in a way that wasn't really a joke at all, about what he would do if Moore ever showed up at his front door with a camera. The tension between these two men goes back a long way. They represent opposite ends of almost every conversation about America, about soldiers, about patriotism, and about what film should be used for. Clint believes in discipline, quiet service, and honoring the people who put themselves in harm's way for their country. Michael Moore's work, particularly Fahrenheit 9/11, struck Clint as political theater dressed up as documentary filmmaking. To Eastwood, Moore was using soldiers as props in an argument rather than treating them as the heroes they were. That fundamental disagreement was always sitting there underneath the surface. Then in 2014, Moore made it personal. When American Sniper came out, one of Clint's biggest commercial successes, in a film he considered a tribute to real military service, Moore went online and compared it to Nazi propaganda. He later claimed it was a joke and that people had misunderstood him, but the damage was done. People close to Clint said he was absolutely furious. not in a loud or explosive way, but in that cold, quiet way that tends to be far more final. He didn't fire back publicly, he didn't engage, he simply removed Moore from any conversation he was part of, and that was that. Since then, Moore's name does not come up around Clint. It is not a subject that gets discussed. For Eastwood, there is one line you do not cross, and that is mocking the military. Moore didn't just cross that line. According to Clint's people, he crossed it with a grin on his face. And that kind of thing, in Clint Eastwood's book, is unforgivable. The third person is someone who, in many ways, is Clint's mirror image in Hollywood, except that everything he does in one direction, she does in the exact opposite. Barbra Streisand is one of the most successful and celebrated figures in American entertainment. She is also, by all accounts, one of the most meticulous perfectionists the film industry has ever seen. And that is precisely why Clint Eastwood cannot stand her. Their conflict is not about a single moment or a single project. It is a deep philosophical disagreement about what filmmaking actually is. Streisand is famous for doing dozens of takes, sometimes more than 50, in pursuit of exactly the right expression, exactly the right tone, exactly the right feeling. Clint thinks that approach is not only unnecessary, but fundamentally wrong. In his view, the first instinct is always the most honest one. If you do something 50 times, you are not getting closer to the truth, you are moving further away from it. By the early 1990s, these two ways of thinking had developed into open contempt. When Streisand was passed over for a Best Director nomination for The Prince of Tides in 1992, Clint was overheard suggesting that if she made decisions faster, she might have more than 3 films to her name. It was a cutting remark, and it got around the industry quickly. Then came the project that, in a strange way, gave Clint the last word without him ever having to say anything. Streisand had been attached to direct The Bridges of Madison County for years. She circled the project, considered it, and then walked away without committing. Clint stepped in, rewrote the script, and made the film with Meryl Streep. It became a deeply moving, quietly powerful piece of work. Streep received an Oscar nomination. The film was considered a triumph. Clint had taken what Streisand couldn't bring herself to commit to and turned it into something beautiful. He never needed to say a word about it. The result said everything. They have avoided each other ever since. For Clint, Streisand became a symbol of everything that he believes is killing real filmmaking: hesitation, overthinking, the inability to trust your instincts and pull the trigger. The fourth name on this list is a man who is in many ways cut from the same cloth as Clint himself. Tommy Lee Jones is intense, uncompromising, and not particularly interested in making things easy for the people around him. Under normal circumstances, those qualities might be admirable. When you put them together with Clint Eastwood on a film set, the result is something close to a slow-burning disaster. They worked together in 1993, and from the moment Jones arrived on set, Clint reportedly knew it was going to be a problem. Jones was the kind of actor who stayed in character between takes, who rewrote his own lines on the day, who kept going even after the director called cut. For Clint, who ran his sets with quiet efficiency and expected everyone to be professional, prepared, and ready to move forward, watching Jones perform was like watching someone set a fire in the middle of a carefully organized room. The breaking point came during an intense confrontation scene. Jones delivered his lines with full force, leaning in, making it physical, making it real. Clint called cut. Jones kept going. He stayed locked in, staring directly at Eastwood, refusing to break. The entire crew went still. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, after a long pause, Clint leaned over to his assistant and said quietly that life was too short for that kind of theater. Then he walked off set. From that point on, the decision was made. Jones was a great actor. Eastwood acknowledged that freely, but they did not speak the same language, and Clint had no interest in spending more time trying to bridge the gap. They have not worked together since, have not appeared on the same stage, and have not mentioned each other in interviews. In Clint's universe, there is room for one person running the show, and that person is him. The fifth name on this list takes us back to the 1960s, to one of the most iconic action films of that era, and to a co-star who tested Clint's patience in a completely different way. Richard Burton was by almost any measure one of the greatest actors of the 20th century. He had a voice like thunder, a presence that filled every room he walked into, and a talent that very few people in Hollywood could match. He also had a drinking problem that by the time he and Clint worked together in 1968 had become impossible to ignore.
On the set of Where Eagles Dare, Burton showed up late. He slurred his lines. He smelled like alcohol. He stumbled through take after take, while Clint stood there, already dressed and ready hours before anyone else, watching it happen with a look on his face that said more than any words could. One crew member said it was like watching the respect drain out of him in real time. Clint didn't lecture Burton. He didn't pull him aside for a heart-to-heart. He just waited, silently, and grew colder with every passing day. When Burton blew the same line for the 10th time, Clint observed dryly that he was being paid by the picture, not by the hour. It got a nervous laugh from the crew. Burton understood exactly what it meant. The final blow came when Burton was overheard describing the movie as a paycheck job. For a man who believed that every single film deserved full commitment, regardless of genre or budget or prestige, that was the end. Years later, when asked about Burton, Clint summed up an entire relationship in 4 words. Talented guy. Wasted talent. That was it. No anger, no elaboration, just a verdict. They never worked together again. The 6th and final name on this list is perhaps the most complicated story of all, because it doesn't end with coldness alone. It ends with something that comes as close to grief as Clint Eastwood ever allows himself to show. Jean Seberg was Clint's co-star in the 1969 musical Paint Your Wagon. She was a genuinely talented actress who was also, at that point in her life, under enormous personal and political pressure. The FBI was surveilling her due to her political activism. Her personal life was turbulent. Her emotions on set were unpredictable in a way that made every single day of filming a challenge for everyone around her. Clint was the opposite of all of that. He showed up on time, knew his lines, did his work, and expected the same from everyone else. Watching Seberg stop mid-scene to ask about her motivation or disappear into her trailer for hours at a time wore him down slowly but completely. He never snapped at her. He never confronted her. He just stood there, waiting, with that expression that people who worked with him knew meant he was done. When the film was released and failed commercially, Seberg told journalists that Clint's performance had dragged the movie down. That, for him, was the real betrayal. He had spent months holding the production together, covering for her erratic behavior, doing everything possible to make the film work, and her response was to blame him publicly. From that moment, she did not exist to him. If her name came up, he changed the subject. If someone asked about her, he lit a cigar and walked away. Then, in 1979, Jean Seberg died. She was found in her car in Paris, alone. The circumstances were tragic and still, in some ways, unclear. When the news reached Clint, people who were with him said he looked genuinely sad. It was one of the few moments in his public life where the mask slipped just slightly and something real showed through. But even then, he said nothing. He never softened his position, never offered a public tribute, never acknowledged their history. The closest he ever came was a single quiet remark made to someone who knew him well. He said that some people are not cut out for the work, and that he didn't need to deal with it twice. Coming from Clint Eastwood, that is not quite forgiveness, but it might be the nearest thing to it that he is capable of. What all 6 of these stories have in common is the same thing. Clint Eastwood operates by a code that most people in Hollywood either can't or won't follow. Show up prepared, trust your instincts, do the work, don't waste anyone's time, including your own. And if someone breaks that code, whether through arrogance, addiction, self-promotion, or betrayal, he doesn't argue with them, confront them, or explain himself. He simply removes them from his life, quietly and permanently, and moves on. At 95, having made more films than most people could name from memory, having outlasted nearly everyone he ever worked with, Clint Eastwood is still standing, still uncompromising, still silent on the things that matter most, and still, apparently, keeping score.